Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. What we're going to work on today is, or I'm going to introduce you, I guess I should say, to a software called Inkscape. And this is a software that can be used to build figures, like the scientific figures that we all have to make on a far too frequent basis. And so the aim of this workshop is really to kind of give you an introduction to the software, um, talk about some pros, some cons, and just introduce you overall to a good workflow for putting together the figures. I'd really like this to be an interactive workshop, so I'm going to go back and forth between my PowerPoint presentation and an Inkscape canvas so that we can kind of build a figure together as we go. And I'm going to show you kind of some of the tips and tricks that I found for Inkscape. One of the brilliant things about Inkscape is that it's free, and it has a lot of online resources and a lot of help online. But of course, a lot of it is geared toward things that as scientists, we don't necessarily need to do. Most of us want to get in, make our figures, and get out. So that's kind of what I'm aiming to do today. If at any point in time you have questions, please put up your hand or unmute your microphone and just start talking. I've got a second screen here where I can kind of see participants, but if you raise your hand and I don't notice, please just unmute your microphone and speak up and ask questions at any point in time. I think everybody will benefit if we make this a little bit interactive. So for anyone who, so I guess I've kind of covered this a little bit. So these are kind of some of the topics we're going to cover today. The first one is just going to be some general guidelines for making manuscript figures. I've made a lot of them. I've made a lot of mistakes making them. And so I'm going to give you some tips, some advice on how to make the process as easy and pain-free as possible, and how to keep a good scientific record of what is going into your figure so that you can come back to it. We're going to talk a little bit about where to get Inkscape. Pretty much everybody here has probably figured out that Googling it is going to take you right there. We're going to talk about kind of what are some of the important features that Inkscape has for making figures. There's an amazing feature called layers, which sounds a bit odd if you haven't used it, but once you start using it, you realize it's awesome. We're going to talk about grouping, text formatting. So in composite figures, it's really important to have kind of a very unified text. And there's a couple of ways that you can do that with Inkscape. We're going to talk about some of the general formatting for importing, exporting images. And we're going to talk about kind of making these composite image panels like you see for Western blots, where you've got a bunch of stacked images. This will also work for immunofluorescence images, although I will say that Inkscape is not a photo editor. There is an alternative free photo editor that is called GIMP, and there will be a workshop sponsored by Krina on that next week. However, Inkscape can certainly be used once you've done the processing of your images to be able to build larger panels into your figures. We're going to talk about importing and exporting images. We're going to talk about some of the preferences you may want to speak. So there's a lot of preferences that you can change within the document to make your life easier. And then some resources for getting help on the software. All right, so some general guidelines for making manuscript figures. There's organization is a little bit key to doing this, and I know that's a lot easier said than done. But in an ideal world, a good kind of modus operandi is to decide where your data is going to go. So this is usually going to be thinking about what is the content of each figure that I want to build, what panels are going to go into the figure, and it's a really good idea as much as possible to match this to the order of the manuscript. Now, a lot of people will build the figures before the manuscript, and that's just fine. But if you kind of have an idea in your head about what is going to go together with what, it will make your life a lot easier in the end. Now, the second thing, and this is one of the most important things, and one of the things that I think it's easy to forget. Organize all of your data source files. It is really, really critical, even more now than ever before, because many journals are now asking to see raw data. it's really important that you can provide all of the raw data files for every piece of data that goes into your figures. There's not just one right way of doing it, but I'm going to let you know what I have found to be a useful strategy. So if I have my data in one folder, what I always do is I take a copy of that data file and I put it into a folder just dedicated to making figures, so that I can keep track of where each panel is coming from. One of the easiest ways of doing this is just to set up a Word document, or you could do an Excel or a PowerPoint, and just keep a list. What is the name of the data file that corresponds to panel 1A? What corresponds to panel 1B? And it may sound annoying and trivial, but your future self will thank you when you have to go back and edit something or find the original source file. And again, it's also really important for the integrity of the figures, because again, many journals are now asking to see the original data. All right. Now, in terms of planning these big figures, there's a couple of things you can do to make your life a little bit easier. We've all seen what the figures look like, right? Most figures, if you look at a journal page, they cover either one column or two columns within the page of the journal. So this gives you a good idea of how wide you should be planning your figure panels. It's sometimes a good idea to check the journal requirements to see whether they've got specific margins or anything that you will need to know. It's a good idea to plan a color scheme. And I say this because the color can really enhance your data. It shouldn't be something that detracts from your data. It should really be something that is designed to kind of help readers follow. So I'm sure all of you have seen manuscripts where, they use certain stimulation conditions throughout the manuscript. And it's really helpful when they actually, use the same color scheme throughout the entirety of their figures, because it makes it really, really easy for you to follow what is where. The other thing to consider is that color blindness is a thing, and there are perceptual color differences. So just be aware of what colors you're mixing together. For example, never use red and green, because a significant portion of the population is red-green colorblind. Now, another thing that can be very helpful along the way is to plan how big each graph is going to be. Now, if you look at a nice figure, you've all noticed that, all of the graphs are the same size, all of the flow plots are the same size. And if in your data files, you can kind of systematize that. So for example, I use Prism to make graphs. I have my y-axis set to the same size all the time, so that when I'm exporting that into my panels, I don't have to start resizing that in order to match between them. And that kind of helps guide the fonts to be all the same, and it helps kind of line everything up when you're making your figures. Now, another thing is the text. It's a really good idea to make your text uniform within a figure. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. There's kind of three options that I think most people take. So number one is, if in your data files, you always use one font and one type size. So for example, if you have a bunch of graphs that you're going to be moving in from Prism, always use the same font size, always use the same, line width for your graphs and your axes. And then when you put them into your composite figures, everything is going to look uniform without you having to make a lot of changes. Another option, and some people like this better, is to import your graph and text and then batch edit within Inkscape. And so in this case, you can bring in figures that have different sizes of text, and you can then batch edit them within Inkscape. And that's one of the things I'm going to show you how to do today. And this kind of uniformizes everything on the page. Now, the other thing you can do, and this is an option I used to do before I realized you could do this batch editing, which was, some people will export all of their graphs without any text and add that in afterwards. It makes sure that your text is uniform, but it's really tedious. So the fact that Inkscape will allow you to do this batch editing is, I think, one of its best features. All right, so why choose Inkscape? I've talked a little bit about that already. So it's free, it's open source, and it's a really powerful piece of software. There are a lot of tools that we are absolutely not going to touch on today. Inkscape can do a lot of amazing graphic art. We are going to focus on scientific figures, but if you do like graphic art, then this program has a lot of benefits. It's a really good alternative for Adobe Illustrator. And for everyone here who uses Adobe, Dr. Alan Underhill will be giving you a workshop on Adobe Illustrator tomorrow. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, that would be a good thing for you to attend. Now, the file format that Inkscape uses is SVG, which stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. And this is a file type. It's not proprietary to Inkscape. It is a common file format. It's compatible with many other software programs, which is one of the things that makes this convenient, and it can be easily shared. That's one of the reasons that Inkscape is great, is because you can easily share files. It's perfectly compatible with both Mac and PC. And again, there's tons of online support, and there's more and more online support. I have found, I've been using this for about 5-6 years now, and there's more and more online support about specifically scientific figures. So if ever you're stuck, don't be shy to Google something. You'll probably find some kind of a solution. So where can you get Inkscape? The website is right here. You should be able to copy and paste that into your browser if you haven't already. And there is a manual online. It is a really great resource. It is searchable. So I would encourage anybody who is stuck to also take a look at the manual. Now, this is, when you open up Inkscape, this is the interface that you're going to see without all of these colors. You're going to see that we have a canvas or page in the center. We have rulers on the sides. We have toolbars, very similar to other pieces of software. And we also have a toolbox on the left here, which will allow us to draw shapes, draw lines, etc. We have a color palette at the bottom here. And we have a docking area that's going to allow for, basically, it contains all of the options to edit the individual elements in your figures. And this is one of the nice things that we'll be able to use as we go back and forth between the figures. So this is just a general overview of what it will look like. All right, now the basic command. So this is the ribbon at the top of Inkscape. I've highlighted, mostly not to so much to go over now, but as a reference for you if you are starting to use the software, some of the really key tools. So we have the import button here. We have the option to rotate or flip objects. We have the option to change whether something is on the top or the bottom. So there are some features that are very similar to PowerPoint. We have the position of an image on the page. We have the width and the height of an object. And this is a really important button, the lock aspect ratio. For anybody who has dragged a figure and had it, completely distorted, this is going to be one of your key ways of fixing it and making sure that does not happen. We have grouping buttons. We have buttons here that will allow us to change the color and the lines, the text and the layers. We have an align button, and we're going to talk about the align features in Inkscape because they're a lot more powerful and they give you a lot more options than the ones in PowerPoint. There is the option to set document properties with this button, and then there are some system preferences or software preferences that you can set here. And there's also a snapping menu for people who like it when their figures snap from one side, from one set of borders to another or between each other, which I'm going to touch on a little bit today. Now, the left toolbar is basically where you're going to be able to access shapes, the pencil, where you're going to be able to draw lines, the text tool, where you can select to draw text. And there's a couple of weird quirks about the tools that I thought I would put here. One of the things that annoyed me the most when I started working with Inkscape is that once you select a tool, it actually stays selected until you press the escape button twice. It's still one of my biggest pet peeves about the software, but it is nice that the tool does stay selected afterwards. I found no way to disable that. To make a line, lines seemed like they should be really easy. Inkscape has so many options that it's not necessarily straightforward, so I'm going to show you how to do it today. You can do it with the pencil option or something called the Bezier path tool. And then inserting a special character, so for anybody who needs to insert alphas, betas, gammas, use anything like that. There's a proper way of doing it, which is super annoying, and I'm going to show you a much easier way of doing it today. Now, when you are working with objects within Inkscape, you're going to see a couple of different features appear around them. So if this red box is your object, when you first click on it, what you're going to see is a series of arrows pointing away from the figure. And this is basically what's going to allow you to resize the figure. If you click again, what you end up with is kind of a rotation series of arrows. And in this configuration, you're going to be able to rotate the image in any direction that you want. And there is a way to do a controlled rotation, and at specifically 90 or 180 degrees that I'll show you. And if you quickly double click on a figure, what you'll see is there's a lot of options to drag the points and resize them and reshape your figures pretty much ad infinitum, which is mostly something we're not going to be using when we're making scientific figures, but it's still a really good thing to know that is available. Now, there's some key document properties that are a good idea to set right up front. The first is when you go into document properties, set the page to US letter, because that is the size that every journal is going to ask for, whether you're in the US or whether you're submitting to a UK or an Asian-based journal. They all use US letter-based. For whatever reason, the default seems to be A4 size, which is the European page size, and it's a little bit different than US letter. And I have not found a way to change that in default. Now, the second thing that you can do here, and that I strongly suggest, is that you set the background for your canvas to be white. And this is because if you don't do this, when you export your images, all of them are actually going to have kind of a transparent background, which can be quite annoying. So by doing this, it's a nice, quick, and easy way to set up your document, and it will avoid kind of problems as you're going forward. So we're going to switch to Inkscape right now, and I'm going to show you the canvas. So this is what the canvas looks like when you open it up. I'm just going to minimize this up here. So we have our page that is centered here. We have our controls at the top, our toolbars on the right, colors on the bottom, and then we have what's called the docked area. And this is basically going to show you the individual tools that you can use depending on what is selected on your page. So we're going to go in right now and we're going to set the document properties. So that's going to be this button up here. So if you click on it, we're going to get this menu coming up, and we can just quickly click on here where it says A4, change this to US letter, and now that's going to be the typical page size that we work with. I like my units in millimeters. If anybody prefers them in inches, you can change that over here, or in pixels even. And now to set that white background, if you click on page, what you'll see is this window is going to come up. And what you want to do is take this bottom box here on the bottom right and set that to 100. So that's going to be 100% opacity. And that is going to make a white background for all of your figures. So again, if you wanted your background to be a different color, you can set that there. So once you've set that, you are good to go with starting to build your figure. So let's quickly switch back to PowerPoint and look at some of the important features for making figures. Now, one of the things that I recommend doing, and again, the motivation for this is that a lot of the time you're going to be building your figures. If you do it kind of optimally, you want to build them in a size that's going to correspond to that US letter-based size. And so if you build your figures on a template that's already that size, it's going to make life much easier, and it means you won't have to be drastically resizing your figure in the end when you go to submit your manuscript. So an easy way to do that is to actually enable guides and set them all around the page like this to kind of act as margins, as a guide for you to kind of, this is the size that your figure needs to fit, either widthwise or lengthwise. If you want to do a one-column figure, you can make this narrower, and that will give you a guide to making a one-column figure. Now, the guides are easy to set. Basically, you're just going to drag them in from the left, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. And you can set the margin guides, and actually lock them so that they don't move. And then you can use guides similar to the way that you use them in PowerPoint in order to be able to actually kind of line things up on your document. So if we switch back to Inkscape, the way we're going to do this is we're going to go over to the left-hand side. We're just going to drag this margin over to here. And we're just going to kind of drop it here. I'm going to drag another one. So you always drag from the left. We're going to drag it over to this side. And I'm watching the ruler at the top so that I'm making them a consistent size. And you can see I did not make this a consistent size. There we go. And now to get margins from the top and bottom, you just drag them from the top and you can set them top and bottom. Down here. And now if you want to lock these so that they don't move, there's this button over here on the left that you can click, which is going to lock all of your guides. And you'll see that the selector will turn into an X, meaning that you can't actually move those guides now. You can, however, bring new guides. So this is a new guide here that I'm dragging down onto my screen. And if I want to be able to edit that one, what I can do is I can unselect the guides and I can work with it. And if you want to lock individual guides, you can kind of double click on them. And within this menu here, you can click the locked button and you can actually lock one guide or another guide out, locking all of them. If you want, you can change the color or the label of the guide or the size. All of this is up to you, but it gives you a really nice tool to kind of work with and line up your figures. So moving back to Inkscape, whoops, wrong thing. There we go. All right, so one of the first things that you're going to want to be doing when you are working with Inkscape is probably, importing graphs. Graphs are one of the major tools that we use all the time as scientists. And when I say graphs, I'm talking about vector graphics that are made in Excel, Prism, or R, or any other basically graphing program that you use that is going to create line-based graphics like this. Honestly, the easiest way to do this that I found is to straight up copy and paste. And that is because Inkscape is really designed to work with these line-based images. And Inkscape will recognize immediately that that is the type of thing that you're importing, and it will automatically kind of recognize the individual elements for that. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice, and I'm going to show you this in a minute, is that when you copy and paste a full graph from Prism into Inkscape, what it's actually going to do is it's going to paste each of these bars, each of these numbers, each of these text boxes as individual elements. So it's not going to paste a full graph, it's going to paste the individual elements together. And that's great because you can go in and you can edit them individually. But if you don't want to do that, then what you can do is you can just, as soon as you paste it, you can just hit the group button, and then you will have grouped all of them together. So we're going to switch back to Inkscape, and I will show you how to do that. So if I actually go into Prism down here, so this is a graph that I have built in Prism. Again, graphs built in Excel, graphs built in R will all work because they are vector-based graphics. So if we right-click on the image and I just copy the graph, what I can do is I can now switch back to Inkscape, right-click, and do paste. And again, what you'll see here is that I have a bunch of individual elements that are all selected. So if I unselect, and now let's see if I just want to try moving one of these elements. So I can select just this bar and I can move it up here, which obviously is not what I want to do. But if ever you happen to click on your graph and try to move the entire thing and one bar pops out, you'll know why. It's because they need to be grouped. So if we just undo that, the easy way to now get around this is to just drag to select everything, and then to come up here to the group button and then just click group. And now you can easily drag this all around your page as a specific graphic. So we're going to put this one up here for temporary purposes, and we will come back to that in a minute. All right. Now, all of this labeling is something, as I've mentioned, that you can either do in Prism or your graph making software, or it is something that you can do separately in Inkscape if you choose to. That is up to you. You can experiment with both ways. I will again show you the batch editing tool for the font and the text, which is extremely helpful. And it's what I tend to use now so that I don't have to redo everything that is already nicely done for me in Prism. So we're going to go back to Prism for a minute, and we're going to select a second graph, and we're going to bring this one in, just like I brought in the previous one. So we're just going to copy the graph, switch back here, and then again, just paste it in, and then quickly just group everything. So you can also group by right-clicking on the figure, and a lot of options will pop up when you do that. So I'm just going to kind of drag this over to here. And what you can see is you're getting the individual lines, the orange lines that are showing you things that are lining up in a similar way that you get to PowerPoint. And this is because right now I have the snap feature turned on. Again, if this is something you don't want to use, this is something that you can turn off. Sometimes I turn it off because it gets a little excessive in how it's trying to snap. So right now, what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of put all of our images on the canvas, and then we're going to arrange all of them later. So now let's talk about the second type of data that most of us are working with, which is, going to be, hang on a second. All right. Did I skip a slide? I apparently skipped a slide. All right. I apparently lost a slide here. All right, so if you want to import images, and these are pictures, this is the immunofluorescence images you've made, the Western blotting panels that you've made. This can be for those of you out there who use BioRender to make diagrams, myself included. I love BioRender. Inkscape is perfectly compatible with working with BioRender images. And the easiest way to do this is to kind of click on File and then select Import. Or as I mentioned before, there is a button at the top toolbar that will allow you to import. They both take you to the same place. Now that is going to bring up a menu. So it'll bring up the file to kind of choose your image. So you just navigate to your file and you choose your image. And then what it's going to do is it's going to bring up this particular message. And it's going to give you a couple of different options. So the first one is it's asking, do you want to embed the image or do you want to link it to the original file? Always choose embed. Linking it is going to cause any kind of problem. If you rename the file, it will no longer find it. If you move the file, it would no longer find it. And also, if you try to export, it can cause some problems. So embedding is the best option. Image DPI, so this is the resolution that you want in your imported images. I'm going to show you later on how to set a default resolution. Actually, I'm going to show you right here how to set the default resolution. You can choose it either from the file. So if it's a photographic file, so for immunofluorescence images, you can choose whatever the default is, whatever the file DPI is, or you can change it based on what your parameters are set. And you can also change it, obviously, once you bring it into your figure. And then for image rendering, always select none. As scientists, we should not be rendering any of our images individually. We should be working together with the entire panel. If this menu annoys you and you always want to use exactly the same options, you can click the don't ask again, and then it will skip that step after you import your image. If you want to change that automatic DPI import, so the vast majority of the time when we are submitting figures, what the resolution will ask for is usually about 300 DPI. And this corresponds to photographic images. It corresponds for line drawings. Sometimes they will ask for 600 DPI. So this is, again, a good place to check what your journal requirements are. But if you work with 300 DPI, most of the time you're going to be safe. But again, check. And I will show you when you're exporting the image, how you can set that also. So now we're going to import an image in Inkscape. All right, so now we're back to our Inkscape canvas. And we want to be importing some graphics that I have made. So we're going to click on this button up here is going to be the import, or again, I can go to File, Import, and do it that way. So we're going to choose this BioRender diagram that I've made. And again, it comes up with this menu, asking me if I want to embed, what default resolution I want to use. And I'm just going to leave it to what is set here. And you can see, so now I've brought in my mouse diagram for Inkscape. And what I'm going to do for the moment is I'm just going to kind of set it out over here. So I'm kind of roughly positioning my figures so that on the page, they're somewhat where I want them to be when I'm going to actually kind of finalize the figure and line everything up. Now, the other thing that we're going to be importing a little bit later on is going to be images for building a Western blot. Composite image, and this is something that a lot of us will have to do. And this is something that we're going to go into a little bit later for setting all of those, learning to work with all of the different parameters and actually editing, the individual blots into one of those composite images. All right, now the toolbox panel is really where you have all of the options with each of the elements that you are bringing in. And this is going to appear on the right-hand side of your screen. So I have it set to dock on the right-hand side of my screen because I like it that way. If you want, you can set it so that the toolboxes are floating and that they appear and disappear as you work with them. I like to have this docking interface on the right. Once you have docked it, you can close them individually if you want. So right now I have a series of different tools that are accessible to me up here. I will show you how to work with those as we go. And you can, the docking area does take up a considerable size of space on your page. You can resize it really easily by grabbing these 3 bars here at the kind of interface between the dock bar and the canvas and just dragging those to the side. If suddenly they disappear on you, which does sometimes happen, it's just that they've collapsed to the right, and you can actually get them back by clicking on the 3 dots that are on the right-hand margin. So if we look at an example of this, so I have my kind of toolbox docked on the right over here. If I just double click here, I can minimize all of it and then I can bring it back. So it's really easy to kind of minimize this and maximize it as needed. I can also resize, although some of the tools will not let you resize. So you can see I'm trying to drag it smaller here, and this is the export tool, and it does not want me to resize. If I go to something else, so this is going to be our layers, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. This one I can easily resize to make it a little bit smaller. And again, you can turn them on and off or collapse them as needed. And they definitely do take up a significant chunk of the workspace, which is why it's handy to be able to quickly kind of collapse and then bring them back. And you can see as I go through, different features are going to appear for different images. And this is one of the features of layers that we're going to talk about in a minute. All right. Now, grouping elements, this is something that we're all very familiar with, any of us who work with PowerPoint. I've already mentioned kind of how you do it when you import an image. So you just drag to select everything and you use the grouping menu. One of the nice features about Inkscape is that you actually don't have to ungroup the images in order to go into the group and actually make changes. So you can right click on the group and there'll be a little menu that will say enter group, and it's usually the bottom option. And one thing to note, Inkscape actually gives a name to, or some kind of designation to everything that you put on the canvas. So right here, this image seems to be G5571. I don't know if you can edit that. I think you can change that if you want to. Most of the time I just point and click at what I want, and that's good enough for me to figure out what's what. So you can enter into the group that way, and that will allow you to work with the objects as if they're not grouped. And then once you've made your edits, as soon as you double click outside of the grouping area, then it will revert to kind of closing the group again and just keeping all of the edits that you've made grouped. So you don't have to ungroup and regroup all of the time. One thing to note is Inkscape actually does not have a regroup button the way that PowerPoint does. Now, aligning elements, there's a lot more options in PowerPoint than there are, there's a lot more options in Inkscape than there are in PowerPoint. And one of the big things that is really, really useful is that you can actually choose what you're aligning relative to. So let's say you have a figure. So let's say you've got an immunofluorescent figure and you want to align the labels on the left of those. Well, sometimes if you just grab everything and say align left, they will align, but they'll align left based on one of the things that you've selected and not necessarily the one that you want. Whereas with this, you can actually set what is going to be the element, the reference element. And I'll show you how that can be really useful as we go along and build our figure. There's 2 options. So within the kind of align options, you've got kind of the regular ones, which are just going to align to the edge. And then you've got a second option, which have these yellow rectangles. And this is because you can actually set anchors when you're working with the figures. This is not something I typically use, but I wanted to explain it so that people weren't wondering kind of what this box is. So down here, this is going to be a figure, and this kind of plus sign that ends up in the middle here is going to be the anchor. You can actually grab this and move the anchor to somewhere out here. And if you were to do that and then try to rotate, that would become the axis of rotation. So probably not useful to us, but I thought I would mention it so you know what those boxes mean. Distribute is, again, has a little bit more features than it does with PowerPoint. The nice thing about here is that when you distribute, you can actually choose whether you're distributing based on the left corner of your figure, of your elements, I should say, the center of your elements, the right side, or whether you actually want to space them out equally. Now, this is actually really good because a lot of the time, depending, especially if you're using any kind of angled text, this is extremely useful to actually be able to get them to line up the way that you want them to. Now, formatting text is pretty straightforward. So you can add text with this button on the left-hand toolbar, or if you have already imported graphics the way that we have with our figure, then you can just double click on those and then enter into the text box. When you do that, when you're in the text box, that top toolbar is actually going to change to correspond to a text toolbar. And in this case, you're going to have the basic font info that you need. So the type of font, whether it's bold, the size, where it's aligning within the text box, superscripts and subscripts, and then a couple of other options here if you want to actually change spacing between the characters. But this is something that is very useful when you're actually setting the text. Now there's 3 tabs. So if you go into, so we're going to switch back to Inkscape over here. So we're actually going to go into this particular figure, and we're going to actually, no, we'll draw some text on the right. So if I grab some text boxes on the right, oops, that is giving me options. So I've now selected my text and I can start drawing things. So I can just start typing wherever I want. And I cannot spell today, apparently. All right, this is a text box. Now, again, remember that the tool stays selected until you press escape. So I can keep writing all of my text boxes. So if I was preparing labels like this, I could type in all of my different text boxes, and this would allow me to kind of set this all up. Now you can see once I'm within this text box, this menu up here is the one that has changed. So I can go in and I can change my font style. I can change the typing. I can change the size of the type. I can change where we align within the text box and superscript and subscript. Now, if you actually want to go in and look at the text in a little bit more detail, there are a few ways of doing that. So this text menu here, it corresponds to this big T up here. So if you want to bring that up, you just need to click here and then it will come into your doc. If you want to change anything, so if you want to change the type of font, if you want to change whether it's bolded or italicized, and then the font size down here, you can change the font size. Now, one of the things to note, which is a little bit annoying, is that when you first do this, so I have my font selected here. If I now make a change, so let's say I want to make this size 20, and you've noticed that the font hasn't actually changed, even though I've changed that. So you actually need to hit this apply button. And now you'll see that my font will change in size. Now I can undo that quickly by just Control Z. Now there's a couple of other choices up here within this menu. So there's the features. So if you want to use any kind of, I don't even know what a ligature is. There's a bunch of options up here that you can choose to use if you want to change. Most of the time, I don't use this features menu. The text menu is different. So this text actually will contain all of the text that is within the box you've selected. So let's say I wanted to actually, edit this text, but I didn't want to look at that super tiny text box. I can go into here and I can write something else like Bluebird. And then I hit apply. And what you'll see is that changes what is in my text box. So this is particularly useful if you've got like a longer string of text to edit. This can be actually extremely useful. All right, so we will press escape twice to get out of the tool. And now I can easily select these as if they're objects and work with them. And you can see that when I select a bunch of objects, it actually gives me the option to manipulate them all together. So I've got my outward facing arrows here that will allow me to drag this as if it's kind of one feature. And if I wanted to, I can do that second click and I can get these rotation symbols. And I can actually rotate all of them together at one time to the same degree. And we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail when we actually are doing a label for a Western blot. All right, so we've gone over this. Now, adding special characters, a lot of the time, we will have to do something like putting in a beta if we're writing beta actin, or an alpha or a mu. And there's an easy way of doing it. And there is the quote unquote proper way of doing it. So the easy way of doing it is to just type your letters in the normal font that you use, make sure they're lowercase, and then to go into your font, your text editing options, and to just change your text type to symbol. And symbol, as long as you've used the small characters, it will automatically just convert them to the small Greek characters. And that is by far the easiest way of doing it. You can actually copy and paste them in from Word too, if that is something that you want to do. If you want to do it the proper way, you actually have to go into the text menu at the top and the Unicode characters menu on here, and that will bring up this box that you're seeing here. Once you go in and you click on this range, you change it to Greek and Coptic, then you get all of your Greek symbols here. If ever you want to put a different language, so if you want to write in Arabic, for example, you can get all of the appropriate script here, and you can actually insert that into your figure. So you just need to click on it here, and that will open it up in the box, and then you just need to press append, and that will add it into the figure. So again, if it's just Greek symbols, by far the easiest way is just write them in and then select Greek as your font size. Sorry, select symbols as your font size. All right, so lines. This is one of the most important things that we're all going to need to do is make lines in our figures. Now, to select a straight line, the easiest way is to grab the pencil toolbar. And there's no way, if you just grab the pencil toolbar and start dragging, you're not going to get a straight line. You're going to get a line that is going to curve, or however steady your hand is. There is no option, again, to just draw a straight line. The way around that is if you choose the pencil option, click to start the line, then press Control and then drag the line. The Control will keep your line horizontal or vertical. So it will allow you to draw a perfectly straight line, and it will allow you to rotate it in increments of 15 degrees. We'll show you that right now. So if I now go over here and I choose my pencil tool, so I've got a pencil. So if I just try to now draw something, you can see that I am completely incapable of drawing a straight line by myself. So we're going to get rid of that. But what I do is now if I click on one point, if I click on a point here, and now I hold down Control, what you can see is I'm drawing a perfectly straight line. I can rotate it to perfectly 90 degrees or 180 degrees. And I'm just holding down my Control button now as I move it. So I can make it as long or as short as I want. And then as soon as I click on it, oops, I let go of the Control button. There we go. To end the line, basically you just double click, and now you've got your straight line. If you did want to go in and change the actual rotation of a line that you've already drawn, you can go in and select it, and you can choose the object. Nope, not object. View. I'll remember this in a minute. So where is it? Object transform. I have this written handy dandily in the slides that I gave you, but I am not finding it here. So the transform menu is basically over here on the right. And this will allow you, there's a couple of different options up here. And the one you're probably going to want is going to be rotate. And so here you can easily set an angle to rotate your object. Now, if you just want to do kind of a 90-degree rotation, you can easily just grab these arrows up here and they will rotate it easily from 90 degrees to 180 degrees. If you want to do a more complex rotation, then this is your tool to be able to do it. And if you want, you can, again, select a group of objects to add the rotation, or you can simply select one at a time. Now, the Bezier tool is another option, which is going to be this guy here. This option will allow you to actually take your line and convert it into a shape if you want. So let's say you suddenly wanted to turn your line and make it into a box. This is going to allow you to do that, but it's got basically the same feature that if I hold down Control, again, I'm able to kind of draw a perfectly straight line at whatever increment of 15 degrees that I choose. And you can see that I've got my straight line here. So it's actually quite simple. It's just if you actually were to kind of grab the line tool and actually try to draw a straight line, you'd be like, what the heck is wrong? And why isn't there a tool to draw a straight line? So as long as you know that trick, that will make drawing lines a very simple thing to do. All right, and so we've, oh, I should go back. So if you'd like to format the color and the point size of your line, the tool you want to use is going to be this guy here. And it is going to open up what is called, so the symbol looks like a little calligraphy brush, and it will open up so the option to fill the stroke or the stroke style, so the stroke color or style. So fill, this applies to, obviously, if we have a 3D shape. If we go to stroke paint, so this is going to be setting the color that you want for your line. And the easiest way of doing it is just coming down here to your color palette and just changing the color of your line. And that is going to change it pretty simply to red. You can actually, there's a lot of options for what you can do here. Now the stroke style, if you want to change this to dashes, to dots, you can do that. And then you can actually regulate how many dashes there are per unit length. So there's a lot of different options you can make. If you want to change the width of the line, so right now this is at 0.26 millimeters. If I wanted to change this to 0.5, I just need to type it into the box, and that will actually change the width of the line. And you can see it doesn't actually look much different because it's a pretty small change. But if I change this to, let's say, 4, you can see that I've got a pretty significant change. So that is kind of the easiest way to be able to change kind of the width of a line. I should mention, so there are these 4 boxes up at the right-hand side. When you open up Inkscape, they are automatically selected. You can see that they're darker in color. And what these basically do is they make sure that when you scale an object, so if you make it bigger or smaller, the width of the line will scale along with the size of the image. So if you take an image and make it bigger, the line will automatically become wider. If you accidentally unselect one of those, because some people, I guess, don't want them selected, then that would be particularly annoying. And you'd have to kind of turn that back on with the button. All right. So if we now come back over here. So now we're going to talk about making some composite image panels. And this is going to be kind of working with Western blot images or immunofluorescence images to kind of put together a montage of different images that you want. So the number one feature I'm going to talk about here is going to be something called layers. And this is something that's great for any of us who's worked in PowerPoint and has tried to, drag one particular thing, but has accidentally highlighted something, it's not highlighted, but selected something else, and you drag a whole bunch of things that you didn't want to drag. Layers allows you to not have to do that. It's a way of preventing it. And when you're working with the multi-panel figures, it's a really nice way to kind of keep only one panel active at a time. It also will allow you to batch edit certain elements, which I will show you how to do. And it also will allow you to just view some elements at a time. So sometimes you may want to only see some of the panels that you're, 1 or 2 panels that you're working on, and you can do that with the layers. There's a button right at the top that you can choose to kind of bring up the menu, which is here. And then the layers menu will come up here, and you can see that there's a bunch of different layers in this figure. So we're going to go back to our document in a minute, and we're going to add some of these layers. And the nice thing that you can see is, again, you can lock everything in the layer, which means that nothing will change. And you can hide them if you want to work with different layers. So now if we come back to our figure over here, so let's say I am planning to make this panel A, this panel B, this panel C, and maybe this panel D, which does not exist yet, but we're going to make it. What I can do is I can go and I can select this particular image, and I can click on the layers tool at the top here. And I'm going to get this menu. Right now, it's telling me I only have one layer because I have not added any. So everything in this image right now is in layer 1. If I wanted to, so you can see when I hover over it, I get an eye option and a lock option. So if I click on the eye option, what you'll see is everything disappears on my canvas. And absolutely nothing has disappeared. I just can't see it. So if I unclick, everything comes back. And I can lock everything on the canvas so that no matter what I do, I cannot select or drag any of these features. Now, obviously, that's not what I want right now. But so let's say I want to restrict each of these to an individual layer. What I can do is I can add layers. So I can call this, let's say, panel C. No, sorry, panel B. Let's put them in order. And I'm just going to drag this underneath. So I can rename this one to rename layer. I can call this panel A. Okay, and we're going to add another couple. So we're going to add one for each of our, so we're going to do a panel C. And I'm going to be smart this time, so I can tell it I want it to put it below the current layer. You can also make it a sub layer under one of the layers, panel C. And I, of course, did not have the right one selected. So, and right now. Okay, so you can see I accidentally docked this under panel B. So I'm just going to delete this and make a new one. Below current. Okay, so this is going to be panel C. Okay, and we're going to make a panel D. Now, the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a panel that is strictly for the letters. So the panel letters. And this is really useful because a lot of time you put your A, B, C, D on your page. And then every time you try to like work with the individual things on your panel, you accidentally grab the A, B, C, and D. And that can get in the way. So with this, what we're going to do is we're going to add a layer, and I'm going to call it letters. And now that's going to allow me to put the letters. So right now, again, everything is in panel 1, panel A. So if I want to change that, so I don't want to change this one. This one I want to bring to panel B. So if I right click on it, you can see it says move to layer, and I can now change this to panel B, and it automatically moves it to panel B. I can take this one and I can move it to panel C. And what we're going to do now is, so now I can work with each of these individually. I can kind of see and unsee them individually. I can lock and unlock them individually, which is a very nice thing. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add in some letters. And these are going to be the letters for our panels. So we're going to type in A, B, C, D. We're going to escape out of the text tool. And now I'm just going to kind of roughly align them here. We're going to align them properly afterwards. But right now, we're just going to kind of roughly put them where they belong. And again, if we were to just kind of leave these here, we'd accidentally be selecting them as we were trying to work with the figures. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take each of these. And right now, I had panel C when I actually typed those letters. So they've been assigned to panel C. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them. And to select multiple objects, you just shift click on the objects. I'm just going to shift click on all of these. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say move to layer, letters, move. So now all of those have been moved to my letters. And now what I can do is I can lock that so that even if I'm trying to like resize or move around this panel, I can't select this letter. And it's very nice when you're actually trying to build those panels and to line everything up and to work with them. So that is a very convenient thing. If you don't want to see all of the details for every layer, so right now, every time I open one of these, it's literally showing me a detail for every element in the layer. If you don't care about that or you find that messy, what you can actually do is you can click on this option here, which says layers only view. And now basically all you see is the individual layers. And that's a lot cleaner to look at. And it's probably enough for what most people want to do. All right, so we've got this set up and we're slowly building our figure. So now we want to talk about batch editing some similar elements. So let's say I have imported graphs that have different sizes of font, different sizes of text, and I want them all to be the same. There is a select same option that is built into Inkscape, and that will allow you to select one element of one type and then click on the select same. And then basically what it will do is it will select all the similar elements of that one particular type. So if I want to select all text, it will select all text. And then you can actually batch edit the text. So I could make all the text the same size. I can make all the text the same format. And it's really, really convenient. Let's say you have a bunch of graphs and some of them have axes that are wider than others. You can select the axes and change them all to the same size in one quick edit. So if we come back to our panel over here, if I look, so I have text that's over here. And if I look at this text, if I go to my text tool over here, I can see that I'm at 12-point font. And if I look in my group over here, and remember that if I want to enter the group, I just need to click on here and say enter group. And now I can easily access these individual group items. So now you can see that my font size within this panel is 10.875. So ideally, let's say I want all of my font to be 10 point size. So the easiest way to do that now is make sure all of your layers are unlocked. In this particular one, so if you have a layer that is locked, the batch edit doesn't work on that particular layer. So if I batch edit text now, it's actually not going to change these letters up here. So I'm going to right click on this panel and I'm going to say select same. And in this particular case, you can choose everything that has the same fill and stroke, which doesn't make sense for a text, but for other features it does. In this case, I'm going to select object type. What you're going to see is now automatically all of the text has been selected in my document, all of the editable text. It will not edit text that you've imported as part of a figure, such as this guy over here. Now, what I can do is I can go to my text menu and I can say, okay, I'm going to make all of this text, let's say 10.5 in size. And let's say I'm going to make it not Arial. I'm going to change it to, let's change it to Helvetica. So you can scroll down here to Helvetica, which is one of the other options. So make sure you choose a sans serif font when you're building tools. I think pretty much everybody knows that. Oh, wow, we don't even have Helvetica. All right, well, let's choose a different one. Let's choose, no, that's not a good example. Here we go. We'll choose Berlin font. And now if I hit apply, it's basically going to change all of my font to now meet this particular criteria. Now, this is obviously not the font type I want, so I'm going to undo that with Control Z, and then I'm going to actually go in and change it to Arial and then 10.5. So, oh yeah, remember change, select all. So this allows you to kind of, if you want to make a batch edit of text, it's a very quick and easy way of doing it. So Arial, we're going to change this to 10.5. And let's say I wanted to unbold everything, I could choose normal text and it would unbold everything. But now I'm going to click apply. And now all of my text is exactly the same size within my document. And so that's a really quick and easy way of uniformizing all of the text on the page. Now I did ungroup this particular object. So I entered into the group. So now I just double clicked outside of that group. And now you can see it's automatically, the group has been reactivated without me having to do anything to actually activate it. So you don't have to ungroup the object. So this is a grouped object and it went in and it edited those anyways without me having to make any change. Now, similarly, let's say I had wanted to edit all of the bars on my graph. Let's say they're all black and I suddenly would like to make them all red. Then I can choose one of those, select same, and then change all of them to red color very easily and very quickly. So again, that's one of the most powerful things I think that Inkscape will allow you to do. All right. So moving along, Western blots, for many of us, these are the bane of our existence. For those of my lab does a lot of Western blotting. Some labs do a lot of immunofluorescence. So immunofluorescence, I hope, is less painful than Western blotting. We're doing a little bit more of that recently, so I will report back. But one of the things that we always want to do with these types of panels is that we often want to assemble a bunch of them together into kind of that uniform panel where we have, each individual protein kind of layered above a loading control with the names and the protein that's been blotted for, and then the molecular weight markers on the side. So putting those together, it can be done in PowerPoint, but it's a lot better to do it in Inkscape for a couple of reasons. And I'm going to show you some of those reasons today. So number one, you're going to want to import your images. Now, depending on what type of program or software or ECL reagent or fluorescent reagent you use to develop your blots, you may end up with fluorescent images if you do fluorescent detection, or you may end up with already grayscaled chemiluminescent images. So I'm first going to show, for those of us who do fluorescence, I'm first going to show you how to really easily convert from the fluorescent version into the grayscale version. And this is the type of, so we always have to be mindful of what types of image manipulation we are allowed to do, what types are ethical. These kinds of modifications are perfectly fine because you're taking the entire image and editing it all at the same time. And all it is doing is flipping basically the contrast of the image. I'm sure I'm using not quite the right terminology. Contrast may not be the right word, but it's flipping everything so that you're maintaining all of the data is actually preserved. It would be unethical to, let's say, crop a particular band out, change the scale on that, or change the colorization on that, and then kind of stick that back on the end of the block. So that is the type of image editing you are not allowed to do. So everything I'm showing you is pretty straightforward and very legal. So once we import our Western blot images, the way we can colorize, it's a two-step process. You can actually select filters. So there's a filters menu up here, and there's a whole lot of filters that you'll see. Playing around with these can kind of be fun. You can actually make your image kind of, bleed away from you into like wet paint falling down a wall. There's some fun image effects in there. All right, for what we want to do, we want to select color. And then within color, we want to select grayscale. And grayscale, what it's going to do is it's basically just going to convert this image into this one. And what you can see is this is not usually the type of image we want to publish. Usually for Western blot images, we actually want the reverse. And so the second thing that we're going to do is with that image, we're going to, again, filter color invert and then invert lightness. And that's going to convert it into the light background with the dark bars. And for most of the time, for most papers, that is the format that you typically see a Western blot in. So if we switch back to our canvas over here, so I'm going to get rid of my lovely text boxes. Get rid of those, and we'll get rid of this line. All right, so we're going to come over to layers because I'm going to be smart this time, and I want this to be panel D. So I'm going to select panel D right now, and so anything I import now will automatically go into panel D. And again, you can move it if you accidentally put it in the wrong panel. So we're going to import an image. We're going to hit that box up at the top, and I'm going to import this particular image. And again, I'm going to get this menu. Do I want to change anything? So I'm going to click OK. And now I've got my Western blot image that's been imported here. Now we want to be able to change this so that we have the grayscale image. So I can come up here to my filters, and I can choose color, and then grayscale. And then you can play with the different contrast images. I usually just leave them exactly as I want them, or exactly as the default is. You can play with it depending on what you have. You can do a live preview. So this is doing a live preview right now. And I just click apply and close. And so now I've converted my fluorescent image into a black and white image. So now again, I want to do the inversion. So filters, color, invert. And there's a couple of different options that come up here. The default is invert lightness, and that is the one that you want to do. So if I do live preview, you can see automatically that I'm going to flip my image into the grayscale format that I actually want to and will use in my publications. So I have that now here. Now, if you did want to change the contrast or the brightness of an image, you would also go into filters. And you have color, and then you have different things like, where is it? You can change pattern, you can change the individual panels if you want to. You can extract a channel. we are going to go to lightness and contrast down here. And this is where you can increase or decrease the lightness or the contrast. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to decrease the contrast a little bit just so that we can actually see live preview, just so that we can actually see the gray a little bit, so that as we're working, it's a little bit easier to see the edges. So I'm just going to do this. Normally I would not do this, but we're doing it just to make life easy as we are working with the image. So I'm going to hit apply and then close. So now we have our Western blot images that we're going to be able to work with, and these have been imported. So now, as you can see, my Western blot images are totally crooked. This is a problem that if you try to crop this in PowerPoint and linearize it in PowerPoint, you'll have realized really quickly that it's a pain in the butt to be able to crop, because PowerPoint will always try to crop based on this kind of square outline that you have. And if you rotate it, then PowerPoint is not going to kind of detect that rotation properly, and it's still going to try to crop with that rotation in. So in Inkscape, that is actually not a problem. So what we're going to do is we're now going to switch back over here, and we're going to look at how we proceed from here. So horizontalizing bands is super easy. Basically, what you're going to do is you're going to grab your image, you're going to basically click on it twice until you get the rotation, and you're going to rotate it to get it to be horizontal. Now, the easiest way to do this really easily is to bring a guide down so that you can actually see when your image ends up horizontal. Now you can see now that I put this guide here, you can see that actually both of these are kind of crooked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a copy, because we're going to need to work with both of these separately. So I'm going to put this one aside for the minute, and we're going to work with just this guy here. So what I'm going to do now is, so I've clicked once, I get the resize arrows. I click a second time, I get the rotation arrows, and I'm just going to turn my blot and I'm going to make it linear. And you can see that the snapping feature wants to snap my blot. So I'm going to quickly come up here and turn it off. And I'm then going to just rotate the blot. So now I've got my blot, or at least the lines on my blot, nice and horizontal. And I'm going to do the same thing with this guy over here. So we're going to get the rotation, and I'm going to just kind of rotate this a little bit to the left in order to get the rotation. Now, if you wanted to set a specific rotation, that is where you go to the transform option. And this is where you can actually go to rotate and set a specific angle that you're going to rotate. So now this is great. We have our bands that are straight, but now we actually want to, be able to stack our different Western blot images. So this is where we want to be able to crop our blots. Now, one of the things that Inkscape does is it is designed to maintain the integrity of the images that you're actually working with in the file. So what it actually does is it doesn't like the fact that you want to delete stuff in an image. And so what the option it gives you is, instead of cropping, it allows you to clip something. And that sounds kind of silly at first, but it's actually unbelievably useful, and it allows you to basically make everything exactly the same size. So what we're going to do in order to do that is we need to kind of draw a guide for clipping. So basically what clipping is going to do is it's going to select the area that we want, and it's going to delete everything else around it, except that it's really only deleting it from our view. It actually preserves the entire image, so that, let's say, if ever you need to come back to it in a month or in a year from now, as long as you unclip it, you'll be able to see all of that extra data. So that's a really good feature, that you don't actually lose that. So what we're going to do to set the clip is we're going to come up here, we're going to choose our rectangle option, and we're going to draw a box around. Oh, and you can see that this box is decidedly unuseful and unhelpful. All right, so we're going to edit this box so that it's useful and helpful. We're going to come over to here to the ink and stroke options here, and we're going to come to fill. So right now the fill is set to red. So what we want to do is we actually want to grab the fill over here, and we want to change this to no fill. So that's if you want to change it to no fill, it's the arrow all the way on the left. And if I want to now change the lines so that they're not monstrous in size, we're going to go over to stroke style, and I'm going to change this, let's say, to 0.5, which is kind of where we started from. So I'm going to press enter, and that's going to change my stroke style. Now you can, for a lot of the objects, set a default style. And once you make this change, by the way, so now every box that you make will keep this format until you change the format again. So it always remembers the previous formatting you used for a particular tool. So I'm going to press escape again to, whoops, I'm not going to press escape again. I'm going to change this. I was still, my cursor was still in this box, which is why it didn't preserve it. So I'm going to press 0.5, set it, and then I'm going to take my cursor out of that box. Okay, there we go. So now if I press escape twice, I'm going to get rid of the square drawing tool. So now this is the size that I'm going to want all of my Western blotting panels to be. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it for however many panels I have. And now I'm going to take this and I'm going to draw it over here on this other blot that I want to keep. And this is going to be the second one that I want to be able to preserve. And if you have 5, you can draw the same box and put it on 5. And again, line it up and make sure that the box will fit over all of your blocks. Scale your blots size-wise until they fit in this line. If you don't change the size when you first import them, make the compilation and then resize after. That's usually the easiest option. So now I actually want to make kind of my crop. So I'm going to select the image and I'm going to shift click and I'm going to select the square also. So now they're both selected. I'm going to right click here and I'm going to click set clip. And now I've got my first panel for the Western blot. And again, if I wanted to see the rest of the image again, I would right click on this, release clip, and I have everything back again. And now if I need to change the shape of this clip, if I need to make it bigger or smaller, I can quickly do that and then reapply the clip. So I'm going to drag over here, highlight all of this, and then I'm just going to set clip again. Now we're going to do the same thing with this guy over here. So we're just going to select everything. So select the clip, right click, set clip. And now I can easily stack these two underneath and they're perfectly aligned with each other. And you can see that actually, yes, there we go. So this one is a little bit shorter, but it's pretty close. There we go. So now to align these, what we're going to do is we're going to grab them together and we're going to go to the align tool and we're going to just align them left for the time being. So this allows us to kind of put together all of our panels. So you could have each of your proteins and then your gap DH at the bottom. And now we're going to look at how do we want to add text to this particular figure. So we're going to come back over here. So I've showed you this. We've talked about this. We've talked about setting the clip, which can be very useful for being able to manipulate the image. And again, you can release it and get back to your original images without any problem. So now labeling, there's a couple of different ways we can label. If I quickly scroll back to my graphs over here, this is kind of a condition where we have multiple different cell types. We have multiple different treatments. These happen to be Sesame Street characters, but they can be your drug of choice. And we've combined them in a bunch of different ways. So having really long text-based labels is not kind of reader friendly. So in this case, when you have really complex labels, doing something like this plus minus system is really, really useful. It allows a reader to kind of quickly look at your data and quickly, determine what's what. And in this particular case, what I've also chosen to do is I've chosen this particular Oscar condition. So all of my Oscars are blue and all of my non-Oscars are red. So together, it actually makes it pretty easy to read this particular graph. If your Western blot had all of these treatments, then you could put a similar labeling scheme on it here. However, if you have a simpler labeling scheme and you just want to basically label 3 or 4 different cell lines, then the easiest way to do that is to just kind of select your text box or text and then type in each of your cell lines. So we'll type in our classic HeLa cells, our HEC 293, 3T. We'll type in our NIH 3T3. And then if anybody has a favorite, so HCT 116. So I'm just kind of throwing in some cell lines that either our lab works with or other labs work with. All right, so I now have my 5 cell lines here that I've put in. Again, I'm going to just kind of, so we also want to add the protein, right? This is our protein of interest. So I'm just going to write down GK. So this is a particular protein. This is actually what this protein is, ADPGK. And this one is our gap DH. So I'm not making any effort whatsoever to line these up as I'm putting them in. I'm going to line everything up and uniformize it after. And then don't forget your size markers. So ADPGK was around 48 kilodaltons. And, depending on what your lab standard is, you can put these on the right, on the left. Just be consistent with whatever you choose. 48 kDa. All right. So I've escaped to get out of my tool. And now what I want to do is I want to grab, so obviously I'm not going to fit these labels nicely to this blot. So what I'm going to do is I want to put this text on an angle. So I can grab all of the text together. And right now you can see I've got the straight arrows for resizing. But if I click again on one of these, I'm going to get the rotation option. And now, especially if I hold down Control, I'm going to be able to rotate the text. Oops, there we go. I'm going to be able to hang on. So click on the arrows, and then you can see that I'm rotating the text all together at exactly the same angle. So now I can let go, and you can see that all of my text is now rotated at exactly the same angle. I don't need to do it individually. Now, to get these to line up with your individual bands, basically you can just kind of align the first one and the last one, and just kind of roughly make sure that these guys are in the order that you want them. And now what we're going to do is we're going to select these. And this is where the align feature is so useful in Inkscape. So we're going to choose to select. So we want to put everything down to the bottom. So now everything has down aligned to the bottom. And this is where the distribute feature comes in really nice. Now, if you have ever tried to align slanted text like this in PowerPoint, it does not do it properly. But it actually works quite well with Inkscape. So what we're going to do is, you can see it's the bottom left corner that is actually kind of closest to our blots. And what we want to do is we want to space those out. So we're going to go down to distribute, and we're going to choose kind of the left corner here. And what you can see is now I've distributed these so that they're all nicely corresponding to my lanes of interest. Now for the labels, what I want to do is I want to align this guy to my blot. Now in PowerPoint, if I were to do this and just grab these and say align, what would happen is sometimes my blot itself would move up and align with this. Sometimes this would move down and align with my blot. Obviously, what I want is for the label to actually align with where the blot I have. So I have my relative to box selected for first selected. And I'm going to come and I'm going to grab kind of this. And I'm going to make sure that the first thing I touched was my image here. And now I'm going to do align middle. And so now now it's the text that's always going to move because this was the first thing that was selected. I'm going to do the same thing with my gap DH. Oops, I was not quite over with my gap DH, and we're going to align middle. And now we can align these two things to each other, align left. And then in order to move them, obviously I can move these a lot closer. And then we're going to do something similar. So the 48 kilodalton band doesn't necessarily line up exactly with the center of these images. It's for ADPGK, it's a little lower, and for this one, it's a little bit higher. So we're just going to put these wherever the bands would be on your ladder. Then you can align these to the right. And now you have a very nice figure that has been put together, and you can group this together. Now you've got your panel for Western blotting. If anybody wants me afterwards to kind of demo putting together the pluses and minuses like this, I can do that. But I think we'll go through to the end, and then if people have specific things they want to ask about for tricks to do, then we can ask, and I can kind of go through showing you what I know. But for now, this has kind of put together our blot panel here. All right. So now if we move back over here, so we've kind of covered all of these different things for lining up our image. Now for immunofluorescence images, I've kind of mentioned this already. Inkscape is not designed for intense image processing required for immunofluorescence imaging, so IF, microscopy, or any other kind of IF. So the best workflow for working with these images is to edit them in an actual image editor. So this can be GIMP, which again is the free version of Photoshop. Photoshop itself, we're going to have workshops on both of these next week. I shouldn't say we, Karina is hosting workshops on both of these next week, given by Dr. Michael Hensel and Dr. Sujun Sun. or any other photo editing software that you like. ImageJ is another popular photo editor that will work perfectly for this. So you can make your images in there, set them up, and you can then export those images. So each of these individual panels, let's say you're doing multicolor overlays, you can export those and then import them into Inkscape. Now, Inkscape will absolutely preserve all of the data that is in the images that you import into it. So you're not going to lose data unless you import them with a lower DPI than the actual file. You will not actually lose any of the image quality. So again, to set that resolution, you can go into preferences. And again, Inkscape is going to preserve this. So one of the things Inkscape can definitely do is it can be used to kind of put together this composite figure or composite panel figure that has the letters, the scale bars, the different labels, the numbers, the treatment conditions. So this is the type of thing that Inkscape can do once you've actually processed the immunofluorescence images and formatted them the way that you want them formatted. All right, so now how do we export figures once you've made your amazing figures? Now, there is a color caveat that comes with Inkscape. Inkscape works in RGB color format. This is one of my biggest pet peeves with Inkscape. And there's blogs on blog upon blog dedicated to why is Inkscape doing this and why won't they modernize. So a lot of journals will ask you to use, most of the online ones now will allow RGB. Any journal that still has a print version will insist on CMYK colors. Inkscape does not do CMYK colors. It will not export to those. But there are some pretty easy workarounds in order to do that. And what I would suggest you do is Nick at this particular website, whom I do not know, but I found his website very useful. I will point you to his advice for 5 different ways in which you can do this. I used one of them for my most recent submission and it worked perfectly and I ran into no problems. So that is a caveat of Inkscape that is not present in Adobe Illustrator. All right, so how do you now export your image? There's an export toolbar, export button in the toolbar at the top. And the nice thing is you can choose what you want to export on your canvas. You've got a couple of options here. You've got document, page, selection, or custom. And this will allow you, so if you choose document, that's basically going to be everything that is on your worksheet. So even if you have some images dragged like off of your canvas, it's going to actually export those all together. If you don't want that, you can choose page. So page will basically export everything that's on a page and it will do it in page size. Okay. It will not just export the images. Selected will basically allow you to select only what you've selected. So let's say we made our fantastic Western blot a few minutes ago, and I just want to export that. I can select that Western blot, and then I can choose selection when I want to export. And so the export option will also allow you to choose what format you export. So if you click on the bottom right here, you can see the export options are SVG, which is your Inkscape file format. You can do PNG, plain SVG, which somebody can one day explain to me what is different than Inkscape SVG, JPEG, PDF, TIFF, or WebP. So pretty much you can find any type of image that you need. You have the option of exporting it here in Inkscape. So you set your type of export. And then if you double click on this folder, it will give you the option to give a name to your image and to choose what folder it exports to. And then all you need to do is click export. And oh, sorry, if you want to set a different size than the default size on your screen, you can do that here. And you can also set the resolution. So I've got it set to 300 DPI for most of my things. So you can set all of this for each individual thing that you export, or the DPI you can set up in preferences. So if we go to take a look at how to do this in here, so we have our panel. So let's do a couple of things with our panel first. So this is a figure that, let's say I want to submit to a journal. I can see that my different panels are not lined up. So let's bring in a guide here. Oops, let's not collapse my toolbar. So if ever you collapse your toolbar, just drag it back. Let's bring over a guide here. So what I want to do now is I want to line up my y-axes here. So I'm just going to drag this over here so that my panels are aligned. There we go. You can also use your arrow keys for really fine adjustments. So there we go. So now these are aligned. I'm going to align my kind of figure panels here. So I've got my image here, and we're going to align this guy a little bit better. And I want the bottoms of my thing. So right now I have this guide here. So my image right now here, you can see that my lettering is falling below. So if I want to, I can take this and I can just move it up a bit. And normally when you're trying to pack in as much information as possible and as many panels as possible into your figures, knowing these little tricks is very useful to kind of maximize size. And again, so I want to kind of line up my Western blot here. And I'm choosing to align it to the bottom. You can choose to align to something else. That is completely up to you, but you want to kind of make it pleasant to look at. So a lot of the times what will be recommended is to actually align things to the axes as opposed to the labels. So in this particular case, I'm going to actually line this up with the axes and bring it kind of center using my guide. There we go. And you can see that I've turned snap off because I find it annoying when I'm doing kind of the small last minute edits. Now, the other thing we want to do is we want to make sure that our letters are lined up, right? So right now they're kind of a mishmash all over the place. So we're going to come over to layers and we're going to unlock these. And I'm going to grab my A and B and I'm going to make sure that they are aligned. So we're going to align either bottom or top, depending on whatever your preference is. Same thing with C and D. We're going to align top and bottom. And it's up to you how far up and down. So if I want to bring these down here, I can do this. And then actually this gives me the option of taking my entire figure and kind of compressing it up a little bit like this. And now I want to align the A and the C. So we'll align these and align the B and the C. And it's always, you know, reviewers who are going to review your manuscript, having a nice clean manuscript with figures that are easy to read and easy on the eyes, it makes a big difference. It makes a really good impression on people who are reviewing your manuscripts. So even though all of this seems a little bit nitpicky, which it is, it actually can go a long way into, you know, giving the reader a really good impression of, you know, the meticulousness of your work. This also applies, you know, oftentimes I see nice figures coming in. Well, most of the time I don't even, you know, the figures are nice, but every once in a while I'll get a manuscript that's got terrible figures and they're just sloppily done. And it makes me wonder if they can't draw nice figures, then how, you know, how do I trust that their data is not done sloppily? So you always want to give a good impression when you're making the figures. All right, so now we've got everything lined up. If I want to make sure that nothing is going to move, we can go back to the layers here and I can lock everything to make sure that nothing is moving. And now I want to export my particular image. So we're going to go to the export button up here. And you can see I've got the option of doing document, page, selection, or custom. We're going to do the page. And you can see this really will do the entire page. This is often ideal if you're trying to compile a PDF document to submit for a very first manuscript. This way, you know, all of the pages end up the same size for your manuscript. If you wanted to do just the selection, in this particular case, I didn't select anything. So if I come back over here, so let's say I don't want all this white space at the bottom. I can come back over to layers and I can unlock everything. And I can just select the whole thing. Okay, so now I've got my selection. And now I can go back to my export menu over here. And now if I do export selection only, you can see that I'm getting just the image that I want. Now, if I had not previously set this background to white, when I exported my image, all of the space around your image would actually be transparent. For a figure, that's not what you want when you're submitting to a journal. So you can either, you know, do it the old school way and draw a big white box underneath, or you can kind of set that document, that properties right in your particular document. So if I want to change the resolution, I can do it here. If I want to change the size, I can do it here. And then I can change whatever type of document. So in this particular case, let's do a PDF. And then I can double click here and it will give me the option of giving my figure a particular name and where I want to save it. So I can click save and now I am ready to export my image. And you'll see you'll get this export, oops, It had already, so when I click save, it automatically exported. So I just did it twice. There we go. So now we have our image that we've created. We can kind of import it back in to make sure it looks good. Actually, no, that's not a good idea. It's a PDF. We don't want to import the PDF in. That would not be a good idea. Cancel. All right, so let's save it also as a, let's save it as a PNG. We'll do export. All right, so now we can import that back in and we can see that we have our nice image exactly as we wanted it. So we're going to do all files. And where did I export it to? I think I exported it to one above this. There we go. So that's, yeah. And again, it's asking us our default. And so we've got our PNG, which has come up over, oops. Which has come up, hang on a second. Oh, so it's underneath, there we go. This is what I'm trying to move. There we go. So we've got the entire selection. All right. So that is how, and again, the background is white. So that is how you export. And again, you can go in and change the resolution as needed. Usually 300 or 600 is what is recommended by journals. All right, so some preferences you may want to tweak. I have my Inkscape set up a certain way. I'm a big fan of keyboard shortcuts. If you are, then you can actually go into the preferences and see what the keyboard shortcuts are or set some of your own. That's one of the nice things is that you can set your own keyboard shortcuts in Inkscape. If anybody likes to do that. Under preferences, you can actually change how things are selected. So whether you click on a figure, double click on a figure in order for it to be selected. So if you change layers, do you want it to deselect? So there's a couple of different options here that you can choose. One of them is it'll allow you to select locked objects if you want to be that if you want that to be your default. To me, that kind of defeats the purpose of locking the object. Then there's the snapping tool. So there's different degrees to which you can tell it to snap. There's different, proximities that you can set at which it will snap. And you can also set, so there's a whole menu on the right-hand side for snapping. And you can choose whether it's going to snap edges, corners, midpoints, paths. There's a whole host of options over here. I should mention, you can set up grid lines on your figure if you find that easier to work with. I typically don't use them, but you can if you want. So these are some of the options for snapping for people who like those options. Now, steps. One of the things that I noticed when, a lot of the time when you're trying to line things up, you want to move your images by a pretty small amount, left or right or up or down. And I found when I first started using Inkscape, when I pressed the arrow keys, it moved a lot more than I wanted it to. So you can actually go in and change how much your arrow keys are going to move your images. So I've got mine set to 2 pixels, but you can actually change that up or down depending on how you like it. You can set your default export and import resolutions here. I keep both of mine set to 300 and change as needed, but you can always set them the way that you want them. Now, resources for help. Number one, the Inkscape manual is great. It is online. You can download a PDF if you want. You can download it or work with an EPUB if you want. The documents are free. The web version is great because it's super easy to search. This is, again, the link to it. And one thing that I came across that I didn't know existed, and it certainly didn't exist when I started using Inkscape, is there is a YouTube, a series of videos on YouTube called Inkscape for Scientists. It's 27 videos. It's a playlist by InSearch. I will caveat this by saying I have not watched all of the videos, but the ones that I watched were actually really good. There's 27 videos of different lengths, and they deal with things like graphs. They deal with things like, flow files and doing some kind of really, a lot of intensive formatting that is really geared towards scientific images. So you may want to check that out. It can be extremely useful. The other good resources is to just Google stuff. That there's a lot of information out there. Again, some of it is not geared towards scientists, So sometimes you want to do something that you think is pretty straightforward, like draw a straight line, and you end up with like somebody trying to draw like the Eiffel Tower. But a lot of the time you won't have to look too far to figure out what it is that you need to do. All right, so does anybody have any questions about Inkscape that I did not? Does anybody want me to show them how to do something that I haven't covered? If so, please raise your hand or speak up. Shay?
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much. That was a quite useful workshop. I just had a few questions about the Western block images.
Yep.
Do you have to save them in a particular form in order to embed them into Inkscape, or PNG is fine?
PNG is fine. Inkscape, so a lot of people will save them as TIFFs, and TIFFs preserve a lot of the resolution, but they're actually huge. And a lot of journals are really conscious now about how big your uploads are, and they don't want you to upload huge files. So TIFFs is not always the best option for something like a Western blot. For IF, that's obviously different. But no, you don't need a specific file format.
Perfect. One more. So if we had like a figure that consists of two figures sort of, and we'd like to put one in forward and one sent it to the backward sort of thing, does it have, we have to put them in a different layers, or can we do that in within the one layer?
You could do it within one layer. It's just a matter of what you choose goes. You can do, come to front or go to back. And that can definitely be done within one layer.
Okay, sounds perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Does anyone else have questions? Rachel?
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much. The Western blot tips are definitely a huge time saver. You mentioned that you could show us whether how to do the plus and minuses on a graph. Could you show me that?
Sure. So I can do that right now. So if we switch back to Inkscape here, so I'm going to delete this because we don't need it. So let's say I want to give this one the plus minus treatment. So what I'm going to do, oops, I could nicely align it. So I'm going to make a copy of it, just kind of bring it down here to do that. So I will go and I'm just going to ungroup now because we're actually going to change a bunch of things in there. So I'm just going to ungroup. For whatever reason, it's decided I'm not allowed to ungroup it right now. There we go. All right. So I'm going to delete this text here that we have. So I'm actually going to, I can zoom in a little bit now that I'm not working with the whole canvas. So you can actually zoom into quite high resolution. You can make things gigantic. So we're going to start by just, so let's say we've got drug X and drug Y that we have treated our cells with. Let's say there's a third one. So drug Q. There we go. So I have 5 different kind of bands across. So I'm going to need, for each of these, I'm going to need 5 pluses or minuses, depending on what it is. So I'm going to choose them at random right now. So I'm just going to write a bunch of pluses and minuses. And I'm roughly putting them side by side. Doesn't actually, so you just kind of draw them. Oops. It's 4. You can, of course, copy and paste the ones that you've already drawn, and then just change the ones that you need to change. So I'm putting them roughly kind of in a line. Okay, so now I want to press escape to get out of the text and to kind of work with these as objects. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put each one of these in kind of one layer. So this is kind of my bottom layer. So I'm going to come to a line over here. And I'm going to align these to either the middle or the bottom will work well. And I'm just going to kind of pull those down here. And I'm just going to grab all of these, oops, all of these, and just drag them roughly over to here. All right, so now we're going to grab the next 5, and I'm just kind of choosing, I'm going to get one that I don't want. So if ever you grab one you don't want, just shift unclick to get rid of it. All right, so this is my bottom 5, and we're going to, again, align this either to the bottom or the center, and I'm going to drag it down here. And then I'm just going to do the same thing. And so this is just kind of a rough way to work with it to allow us to bring them all in order. So now what you want to do is you will want to align all of these signs. So you want to align basically the pluses and minuses on the edges, and then distribute the pluses and minuses in between. So these are now the ones on the edge. So I want to align these kind of center-wise with each other. So I'm just going to do that here and make sure, so you can move these back and forth a little bit to make sure that they're centered over this band. And we're going to do that with kind of the leftmost band on each of this side. So I'm going to just shift click each of these guys. And I'm going to align those ones center, and I'm going to just kind of move these over so that they're kind of aligned here with that one. So now what I want to do is I want to basically select each of these layers here, and now I'm going to distribute. And in this particular case, it doesn't matter whether you use the center or the space in between. So we'll just center them here. And what you can see is now, as long as we use the same, so we're going to select each layer one at a time. And we're going to do this. Then this. So what you can see now is because we set the outer ones to be the same, in the same kind of vertical, the vertical place, then I can easily just kind of spread these out. And you can see that all of my pluses and minuses are lining up. So now to get them to align with the Q, so the other thing that you want to do is you obviously want them like a similar distance vertically and horizontally. So the easiest way to do that, so this is, I have a little note on my slide about this to kind of group and ungroup as needed to make your life easy. So this is a case where I'm going to actually group these together just kind of temporarily, because it will make lining things up a lot easier, kind of vertically. You can do them each individually. I prefer to just kind of do the grouping kind of temporarily. So now what we want to do, again, we want to set an equal distance between them vertically. So now I can select all of these and I can say, I want an equal distance vertically between them. So that would be this guy. So again, actually any one of these will work for this particular case. So now I've got an equal distance vertically between them. Now what I want to do, obviously I want my drug labels to line up with these. And I know that these ones are already at the distances I want them. So this is where this, relative to thing becomes really important. So if I want this drug X to line up with this and not this to line up with where this is, I'll grab it kind of from the right to the left because this is what I selected first. And now I'm going to say I want to align this to the center here. And it did exactly the opposite that I said it was going to do. Great. All right, so I don't know why it did that. Normally it's actually pretty good. Maybe I should have selected bottom. It's always great when you tell people this is wonderful, this is what it does, and then it does the opposite. All right. There we go. That actually still moved that. All right. It normally does not do this. Oh, I think I need to align to. You can also do it to like biggest object, smallest object. Let's go with biggest object and see if that works any better. Let's align that. There we go. That worked better. All right. Usually you can figure out an option that's going to work and make your life easy. There we go. So now again, we're going to align center. And we're going to align center. Oops, sorry, bottom. There we go. Okay. So now, I think I did not. Oh, this one I did not do. Okay, so this one should have been center. There we go. All right. So now these are all lined up. So now we want to align these kind of towards the right here. And if you wanted to, you can align them with these. So normally you can kind of do this and then align right, and then they'll all be flush. And now you can just kind of group your image. If you want to kind of move this up or down, you can move this up or down by selecting all of it. And then you can select all of it. And my Zoom screen is getting in the way. There we go. And you can group, and then you are good to go. Does that answer your question, Rachel?
Yeah, that was really smart. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh yeah, by the way, make sure you're saving as you go. Always good. You can, by the way, set Inkscape to auto save if you want to in the preferences. That's one of the nice things if you're worried that you're going to be making manipulations and it's, the document may crash on you. I've not really had a problem with Inkscape crashing on me ever. It does, because it works with images, sometimes it can lag a tiny bit, but it's a pretty lean software. Okay, does anybody have other questions? Okay, if not, I wish everybody a great rest of your day and a happy figure making. Thanks, everyone.